The book Wicked by Gregory Maguire is my favorite book of all time. Like many of you, I read it way too young, and a lot of it went over my head, but it had a really interesting impact on me. It's something that I have a tradition of rereading every year. I have my well-worn copy. This isn't the copy that I had when I was a kid, but, I reread it every year, and every year I get a little something different out of it, and it's a really meaningful experience. So I get frustrated when it is dismissed as edgelord bullshit, basically. So I wanted to take the time to talk about it, and I want to take some time to compare the book and the musical. And I want to be clear that this is not about to be me bashing the musical. I think it's a very sweet story. It's a very different story. And it makes me kind of sad that the book doesn't get the same amount of love as it does, basically. So I am going to talk through the plot of the book and the musical chronologically. I'm going to do it a chunk at a time, and then I'm going to compare each and talk about the differences in plot, in theme, in tone, stuff like that. So the book and the musical tell the same basic story. Elphaba's birth through her death and her impact on people's lives. But they use her story to tell very different stories, if that makes sense. So the book is about hopeless causes, grief, apathy in the face of suffering, doing your best and failing, and unbreakable cycles. It touches on fascism, discrimination, sexism, and environmentalism. The musical is a much more hopeful story that also discusses discrimination, but it's just lighter in its depiction, and it's more hopeful. It's a very sweet story, but it doesn't have, to me, the same impact as the book, because it's very watered down to be more palatable. It's also mostly about Elphaba and Glinda's friendship, whereas in the book, Glinda plays a much smaller part. Also, I really wanted to be, cute for these and have, a cute setup, but this app is getting in a month, so I just kind of wanted to get this done. We're going to start with some background lore. Ozma is a figure in the Baum books, so the original Oz books. I honestly do not remember a ton. I haven't read the original books since I was a kid, but that's the important part. In Wicked, Ozma was the royal line before the wizard arrived. When the wizard arrived, there was a peaceful transition of power. This happened shortly before Elphaba was born. So we are in an Oz with a self-appointed dictator who is moving the country further and further right. In Wicked, pagan and royalist go hand in hand. So people who ascribe to that belief system believe that Ozma isn't dead. She's been frozen in time by the fairy queen Lurline, and she will emerge to save Oz one day. Paganism starts to be considered anti-wizard and is suppressed. The pleasure faith is exactly what it sounds like. It is bread and circuses. It's focusing on pleasure instead of morality, and it's heavily tied to the new technology, TikTokism, which is very funny. This book was written in 98. TikTokism is basically this universe's word for steampunk. Alright. So let's start with the book. The book starts the day that Elphaba is born. Her father, Frex, is a preacher who leaves his wife, who is in labor, to go and try to minister to his congregation against the Clock of the Time Dragon. The Clock of the Time Dragon is a piece of puppetry and TikTok technology. It is also a vehicle of prophecy. Frex knows that he's not going to be able to convince them not to indulge in the pleasure faith, but he goes anyway. So that immediately establishes the theme of hopeless causes. And it's funny, because that's something that Elphaba criticizes her father for a lot, as an adult. I'm going to read the description of the Clock of the Time Dragon. This happens in the second chapter of the first section of the book, called The Clock of the Time Dragon. The Clock of the Time Dragon is mounted on a wagon, and it stands as high as a giraffe. It is nothing more than a tottering, freestanding theater. punched on all four sides with alcoves and proscenium arches. On the flat roof is a clockwork dragon, an invention of green painted leather, silvery claws, ruby jeweled eyes. Its skin is made of hundreds of overlapping discs of copper, bronze, and iron. Beneath the flexible folds of its scales is an armature controlled by clockwork. The time dragon circles on its pedestal, flexes its narrow, leathery wings. They make a sound like bellows, and belches out sulphurous balls of flaming orange stink. Below, featured in the dozens of doorways, windows, and porches, are puppets, marionettes, and figurines, creatures of folktale, caricatures of peasants and royalty alike. So, the Clock of the Time Dragon visits their village. Frex fails to dissuade his congregation. The clock performs, and afterwards there is a riot. Some of the women in the village find Milana, who's Elphaba's mother, and they try to get her to safety, because the men are drunk, and they're stupid, and they're angry. They're like, let's get this woman, let's get her out of the way. They take her out to the woods, trying to find somewhere safe to go, and they happen upon the clock. Its keepers had stowed it away to keep it safe from the rioters. So the women and Milana take shelter under it, and Elphaba is born under the dragon, 1 minute to midnight. This part's kind of hard to explain, but Elphaba is supposed to be hard to define. She is teetering between worlds. So not only is she green, but her sex characteristics are not explicitly intersex, but they're abnormal enough that when she's born, they're not super sure what her sex is. I consider her intersex. I feel like that's fair to say. The word intersex is not used in the text, but that's what that means. The book goes on to explain her toddlerhood. Elphaba has a lot of characteristics that the adults around her find unsettling. She's green, obviously. She has a full set of incredibly sharp teeth. She's also very adverse to touch and affection. They actually compare her to a dragon a lot, which is fun. Let's list the adults in the family. Frex is Elphaba's father. He is a poor unionist minister. That is the, religion in this universe. He is devoted to hopeless causes, trying to bring people to the unnamed god. Milana is Elphaba's mother. She's from an aristocratic family in Munchkinland. Marrying Frex was an act of rebellion, because the title of the eminent Throp is passed down through the women in the family, and she didn't want it. She's a former rich girl who never really adjusts to the life that she chose. She is the OG wine mom. Nanny. It is assumed that she's a non-relative. She took care of Milana as a child, and she comes out of retirement to help when Elphaba is born, because Milana and Frex are both incapacitated with despair, because their child is green and has sharp teeth. So, Turtle Heart. Turtle Heart comes into the picture when Elphaba is about 1 year old. He is a quadling. The quadling country is the lower fourth of Oz. It is marshland. Quadlings are described as having brown and black skin, and are, quote, as low on the social order as you can get and still be human, unquote. Turtle Heart intends to go to the Emerald City to appeal to the wizard on behalf of his people. Construction of the Yellow Brick Road is destroying the land. That, plus the Quadlings know that there are ruby deposits in the marshes, and they are afraid of what will happen when the rest of Oz learns this. He ends up sidetracked from this environmentalist quest when he meets the little family, and he actually joins Frex and Milana's relationship. It is assumed that Nessa Rose, Elphaba's younger sister, is Turtle Heart's biological daughter. So let's move on. So they live in Munchkinland until Nessa Rose is born. Let's talk about Milana's pregnancy a little bit. And I'm going to give some content warnings about dubious consent. So after Elphaba is born, a weird green demon baby with shark teeth, Nanny asks Milana some questions, including, did you fuck an elf? Why is your baby green? To which Milana's only answer is that she thinks that she slept with a traveling salesman who gave her a miracle elixir that got her high, made her see visions. She doesn't even really remember if they had sex. She doesn't describe feeling assaulted, but I mean, he gave her psychedelics and without her understanding what he was giving her. So Nanny goes to the Emerald City and she visits an alchemist, Mother Yackle. She gets a potion to make sure Milana's next baby isn't also a green weirdo. And to be fair, Nessa isn't green. She just doesn't have arms. So the story of Nessa's birth is not told at this point in the book. It's told later, but because this is what happens chronologically, I'm going to say it now. It just works better for my brain. So when Nessa Rose was born, the clock returned. It's not explained if Frex tried to intervene again, but we know that, number one, they were actually run out of town this time, and number two, Turtleheart dives. It's not clear if he was just, like, caught in the crossfire, or... Okay, so Munchkinland is experiencing a drought. The book deals a lot with the concept of political scapegoats, right? The Quadlings and the animals, capital A animals, both get unfairly blamed for a lot of the problems in Oz. That night that Nessa Rose is born, the Munchkinlanders have a pagan ritual, and Frex thinks that they sacrificed Turtleheart as part of that ritual. So, after this, Frex's grief manifests as his new hopeless cause, which is converting the Quadlings. They spend the rest of Elphaba's childhood as missionaries in Quadling country. During this time, they are witnesses to the genocide of the Quadlings. We start to touch on apathy here as well. Frex just wants to convert them. Doesn't really care about anything else. He has no opinion on the fact that everything Turtleheart told them would happen is happening before his eyes. The construction workers on the Yellow Brick Road found the ruby deposits. The wealthy of Oz descend on the Quadling country and absolutely destroy it, looking for these rubies. Remember, this is all marshland. The ecosystem cannot handle mining. They destroy the environment. The Quadlings are rounded up into camps, and many die there. It's a genocide. It is a genocide. It is destruction of the environment, and nobody cares. Not even Frex, who is watching it up close. We don't get any insight into Milana's feelings. Frex uses his daughters as instruments of his teachings. Elphaba is green, and Nessa Rose was born with no arms. So, if the unnamed god can love them, then surely he can love you. You should convert. Come on, let's go. Frex attempts to apologize to Turtleheart's family for his death. The matriarch slaps him and does not accept his apology. When Elphaba is around 10, her youngest brother Shell is born, and Milana unfortunately dies in childbirth. Shell isn't that important. We don't talk about him that much. So let's pivot to the musical. The musical doesn't really explain the Clock of the Time Dragon, but I'll put a picture here somewhere. I don't know. But the way that the stage is set up is like everything is happening on the stage of the Time Dragon. So that's very cool. It's a very interesting thing. It's just not explained. So if you hadn't read the book, you wouldn't know that. So the musical starts at the end with Elphaba's death. The first song is called No One Mourns the Wicked. So we're starting right out the gate with the theme of propaganda. Glinda tells the people of Oz that the Wicked Witch of the West is dead. One person asks in an accusing tone, "Weren't you her friend?" Defensively, she explains that, "Hey, we went to the same school, like, that's it, like, it wasn't that real." And she knows a little bit about Elphaba's childhood, which she relays. In the musical, Frex is the governor of Munchkinland. They show Milana having an affair with the traveling salesman, who does give her the elixir, but it's less rapey this time. Then they show Elphaba being born, and Frex being like, ew, gross. The rest of the show is Glinda reminiscing. And it cuts right to them meeting at Shiz. So let's compare. We're starting on pretty heavy notes, both in the book and the musical. The book starts with hopeless causes, and the musical with propaganda. However, I really feel like the musical misses a lot of the richness that the book has. Changing Frex's character really softens these themes of hopelessness and grief, and I just think that's a bummer. I find those themes to be very meaningful. I also think that Frex and Elphaba's dynamic is a really interesting one in the book, and it gets really simplified in the musical. He has a really big impact on her personality. It's very much like she becomes her father. But in the musical, he's just kind of a very flat, evil dad character. The exclusion of the Quadling story also really waters down the story of discrimination, and I think that's a bummer. It's a difficult story, but I think it's a very important one. I also think that the exclusion of the Quadling plotline, there is a lot of potential for a lot of BIPOC actors there, and that's a missed opportunity, and I think that's a bummer, especially in a musical that's supposed to be about discrimination. I think that cutting out one of the parts about discrimination is a bummer. I'm not fond of that choice. The theme of grief is not really present in the musical. I think that really waters down the impact of the story. Just overall, I do feel like the musical waters down a lot of the story, and because it is watered down, it is not as impactful. And again, to be clear, this is not me shitting on the musical. I just don't think it has as powerful of an impact. In the book, Elphaba throughout her life has some weird feelings about her gender, and we already talked about the fact that she is intersex. But her feelings are mostly attributed to the fact that her parents wanted a boy very badly. Frex was the seventh son of a seventh son, so he assumed that he would have sons. And Milana is heir to the title of the Eminent Throp, which is the aristocratic family in Munchkinland. This title is passed through the female line, so she had hoped to have a son in order to spare her child from that pressure. All of this is excluded from the musical, including a lot of the sexism that is inherent to the culture in Oz. And that's where we're going to stop, and I'll see you back here for part 2.